Good evening and welcome to the Pastor Study at Faith Community Church in Geneva. Tonight I'm going to be in Romans chapter 8 verse 26. And I'd like for us to take time to pray for the families of the horrific murders in Colorado and the 10 that were killed, and pray for their families now. If you multiply each one killed by 3 or 5 or 10, we're talking 100 people that are in serious grief tonight and this week. And in Romans chapter 8 verse 26, likewise the Spirit also helps our infirmity, for we know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. For we know not what we should pray for as ought. And we need to just listen to God and pray for these families. It's so important right now because of the shock that they are in. And the shock will last for days, weeks, a year. They don't believe that it's happened yet. And then after the shock comes an agony. And that's when the head ache drops down into the heart, and they have heartache or grief. And as we look at that and pray for them, we need to keep them all in prayer. And it's real important to understand that it's going to be a lot of questions that they're going to be asking. The big question is why. And people never give an answer to why. Don't give a religious answer. Don't give a superficial answer. Don't give a self-righteous answer. You don't know why. Neither do I. Only God knows that. And as the shock is there and then the agony sets in later, some are going to beg with God for this to be over. Others are going to be angry at God that it ever happened. And then some are going to end up denying God because of that. But others are going to find God. And so we need to keep them all in prayer. Believers, unbelievers, all ages, all families, all situations. Keep them covered in the presence and the love of God during this time. And there's no answer to why. We're not God, so like I said, don't give glib answers. Don't give these superficial ones. Well, God has a reason. God needed them in heaven. Now they're an angel, and on and on. Just don't give a comment like that. At this time, and this sounds unusual for a pastor to be saying this, at this time, don't be positive. Don't be upbeat. Don't try to just pop them up out of that grief that they're in, that shock they're in, and tell them that everything's going to be. Just be humble and be prayerful. Job was in the same situation, and his 4 buddies were given the religious answers, and God finally rebuked them and said, you be still, or the same thing's going to happen to you. And what did Job say? Job said, oh, that one would hear me. And so whenever there's somebody in grief, listen to them. Take time with them. Hear what they're saying. And since we're not in Colorado and we can't hear them, keep them in prayer, because God does hear the cry of their hearts. I was reading last week the Shadow of His Wings, and it's a Catholic priest that made it through the Holocaust and in Nazi Germany, and I really enjoyed when he talked about people that were falling away from the faith because of the persecution, because of the grief, and he called these people torpedoes. His people that would pray for the people that were falling away. They're torpedo prayers, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But some of the things that he makes comment, he says, true source of prayer in any form is the heart that overflows with love and faith. So when you pray for all those families that are in Colorado, or people in your own life that are in grief, that are in shock, just think about the love and faith in that prayer. When he started talking and ministering to people that were in these depths of discouragement, he says, prayer is our secret weapon. Is our secret weapon, whether we're feeling successful and delivered, or whether we're being persecuted and dying, like in Colorado, their families are saying why. Well, I'd like for all of you to be challenged to be torpedo men and women. Be a torpedo. Zero in on those people in prayer. And their function was to help those who had fallen away from God, or couldn't hear God, or didn't know if God was even available to them during that time. But these torpedoes, as he calls them, met with others that immediately said a prayer of strength, of love, and what's interesting is he said it's a joy to all of us when one of those stop and turn to God and look to God for their help and their strength. And so I'd like to challenge everybody tonight to be a torpedo. And maybe you can think about that with your own family, or maybe somebody you work with, or your extended family. And you know that there's a situation in their life, and they really need God. And they're asking, where is God? Why can't I hear God? I don't think God's listening to me. I don't think, and all this confusion, this shock that is in their life. Or maybe it's after the shock. Maybe it's been a while. And they have the agony, and they don't want to hear about God. They certainly don't want to be preached at. And so if you think about being a torpedo, and you think of somebody in grief, you think of them as your target of love and faith that you're sending to them. And you think about God that loves them in the situation, though they might not be able to see God or sense God at this time. They might not be think that God is even hearing them. Look at them as a target, and you're a torpedo. You're going to hit that target with the very faith and love of God. And so the priest that the book was written about, he was constantly torpedoing people, torpedoing groups, and praying for to get through that horrific time. And this time in our day and age right now, this week in Colorado, we're thinking about that. We need Christians praying. We don't need to debate the gun laws. We don't need to debate the frustration and the what ifs. And we don't let all that go. What's important is God is with those people, and they need God right now. They need the encouragement of God, the strength of God, the love of God that sustains them. So just getting them through this coming year, because shock and grief is going to last a year, 2 years, 3 years. Just think, their lives are never going to change. Like the police officer that was killed. 7 children are going to grow up now without a father, without that protection, that covering that God has ordained in their family. Pray for all 7 of those children. Pray for that wife. How's she going to meet all the financial needs, the emotional needs, and on and on. If we say, I'm a torpedo of prayer, and think about that, send that grace, that power of God to them, because you'll never know them, but God already knows them. I also, just as a little add-on at the end of the message tonight, I think about the liberal outcry of definancing police departments, and we don't need to do that. What we need to do is punish the sinner, punish the murderer. Yes, tell him the Lord loves him too, but there's consequences for our actions. And so instead of getting into all the debate about the laws and what would have happened, take time tonight and think about God's love that you need to send to those families, or God's love that you need in your family tonight, or God's love in a family that you do know. God loves you, God loves them, and be wise and hear God and know how to minister. And so in closing, again, love, 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 because Jesus Christ loves you and everyone you know. God bless you.